He thought he could arrest her like any other elderly woman, but the moment she spoke, the entire pharmacy froze in shock. It was a sunny afternoon, and Judge Evelyn Carter walked into the local pharmacy to pick up her prescriptions. She moved slowly, feeling the aches in her legs, but maintaining her elegance and calm demeanor. The store was moderately busy, with customers browsing aisles and the pharmacy counter humming with activity. Evelyn approached the counter, and before she could speak, Officer Mark Reynolds, who was standing nearby as part of routine patrol, stepped forward with an authoritative tone. He assumed something suspicious, his mind clouded by biases and assumptions, and demanded to see her identification. Evelyn, taken aback by the sudden aggression, calmly asked why she was being questioned. Reynolds, ignoring her words and relying on his prejudices, insisted she come outside for questioning. The pharmacy staff watched silently, some shocked, some afraid to intervene, as Evelyn maintained her composure, her eyes betraying the strength of a woman used to commanding respect in courtrooms, not sidewalks. Evelyn tried to explain, but Reynolds' arrogance and quick judgment only intensified. In front of the entire store, he placed his hands on her and began leading her toward the exit, drawing gasps from customers. Evelyn's voice, calm yet firm, finally cut through the tension when she said, "I am a federal judge." The words hung in the air, freezing Reynolds mid-step, the weight of authority and disbelief rendering him silent. Everyone in the pharmacy, staff and customers alike, paused, realizing the gravity of the situation. Evelyn's calm confidence did not waver as she looked around, her eyes scanning the room, knowing that her role and experience had just stunned a man who relied on assumptions and power rather than truth. The moment was tense, suspenseful, and charged with unspoken lessons about bias, authority, and respect. As the customers murmured among themselves, Evelyn's presence commanded the room without a single gesture of anger. Officer Reynolds, caught between pride and shock, struggled to find words, realizing too late that he had misjudged a woman whose life and career were defined by fairness, discipline, and intellect. Evelyn, still composed, prepared to take the next step, aware that her calm assertion of truth had already started to teach an invaluable lesson about bias, respect, and consequences. The story was far from over, and what would happen next could change the way the officer, the pharmacy staff, and even bystanders viewed authority, justice, and their own assumptions. Make sure to subscribe and comment, because Chapter 2 will reveal how Evelyn turns the moment into a powerful lesson that leaves everyone in awe. Evelyn, still calm and poised, felt the tension in the air as Officer Reynolds froze, staring at her words like they had struck him physically. The pharmacy staff whispered among themselves, some wide-eyed with disbelief, others silently apologetic for not intervening sooner. Evelyn straightened her back, her elegance unshaken, her voice firm but polite as she asked Reynolds if he understood the seriousness of his actions. The officer's pride fought against reality, and he stammered, trying to justify his behavior, but Evelyn's gaze pierced through every excuse, leaving him unsure of what to say. Customers, now leaning in, sensed the drama unfolding, some shifting uncomfortably, realizing that assumptions and biases had nearly led to humiliation and injustice. Evelyn remained patient, knowing that teaching a lesson required more than words. It required a demonstration of authority and calm strength. She slowly raised her hand to indicate her badge, allowing everyone to see her credentials clearly, and the room fell into stunned silence. Reynolds' face flushed, his voice faltering as he muttered something about routine security checks, but Evelyn's quiet authority left no room for debate. The staff behind the counter exchanged glances, some ashamed, some relieved, realizing that their inaction could have escalated the situation dangerously. Evelyn turned her eyes briefly to the customers, silently communicating that respect is earned, not assumed, and that prejudice can blind even those who think they are doing right. She then addressed Reynolds directly, her voice calm but resolute, instructing him to step aside and allowing her to complete her prescription transaction without further interference. The officer, humbled and visibly shaken, obeyed, unsure whether he had witnessed a miracle or a reprimand, while Evelyn's quiet dignity commanded the entire room. By the time she collected her medications, she had turned what could have been a traumatic incident into a lesson on accountability, awareness, and fairness, showing the power of composure in the face of arrogance. Customers whispered to one another, some nodding in silent agreement, while others looked at Reynolds with new eyes, realizing that assumptions and biases can harm more than they protect. Evelyn, gathering her purse, offered a polite nod to the pharmacy staff, signaling that the moment had passed, but its lesson would linger. She walked out of the pharmacy, leaving a mix of awe, reflection, and unease in her wake, knowing that true authority does not need force but presence. If you want to see what happens next, and how Evelyn ensures justice and accountability, make sure you subscribe and comment, because Chapter 3 will reveal the full consequences of Officer Reynolds' actions and the respect he will learn to earn. The moment Evelyn stepped out of the pharmacy, the morning sunlight caught the glint of her glasses, highlighting the calm fire in her eyes, and Officer Reynolds felt a sudden weight of reality pressing down on him. He knew he had made a mistake, but the fear of embarrassment and the potential consequences of his actions left him frozen, unable to speak, his usual arrogance slipping through the cracks. Evelyn walked with measured steps, each one radiating authority, her presence alone demanding that the world notice, that it pause and reflect. Customers and passers-by followed with their eyes, some whispering in admiration, some in guilt, realizing how easily bias and assumptions could taint justice. The pharmacy staff, still shaken, began murmuring apologies to each other, while Evelyn's silent composure reminded them that true power is quiet, not loud, and humility paired with authority is unstoppable. She reached the sidewalk and paused, sensing the lingering judgment and curiosity surrounding her, and she turned briefly to Officer Reynolds, who had followed her outside, muttering excuses that sounded hollow even to his own ears. Evelyn's gaze was unwavering, her posture regal, and for a brief moment, the world seemed to stop, holding its breath as she let her experience, wisdom, and dignity speak louder than any words. A crowd of onlookers had begun to gather, smartphones out, recording, whispering, some already forming opinions about what they had witnessed, but Evelyn was not concerned with public validation. She was concerned with teaching a lesson that would resonate deeply, not just today, but in the conscience of those who observed. She calmly addressed the gathering crowd, her voice carrying a steady rhythm that silenced all chatter, emphasizing the importance of fairness, patience, and awareness, and making it clear that assumptions based on skin color or appearances could lead to harm and regret. Officer Reynolds' shoulders slumped, his face pale, as the weight of his error finally sank in, and he realized that his routine, his pride, and his blind trust in authority without discernment had failed him. Evelyn continued walking, instructing the pharmacy staff to maintain composure and respect for all patrons, reinforcing her unspoken message that dignity and professionalism demand vigilance and mindfulness. The customers and bystanders were captivated, some silently reflecting on their own biases, others astonished at the quiet but powerful display of authority. As Evelyn reached her car, she paused one last time, looking back at Officer Reynolds, who was now alone, humbled and shaken, a man confronted by his own shortcomings. She turned, got into her car and drove away, leaving behind a silent lesson that would ripple through the small crowd, teaching that true justice and respect are earned through observation, wisdom, and the courage to stand tall even when others falter. Every person who witnessed the scene understood that appearances can deceive, authority can be misused, and that courage, knowledge, and composure could change the course of a moment, and possibly lives. If you want to see the powerful conclusion and how Evelyn ensures that Officer Reynolds learns accountability and respect, make sure to subscribe and comment, because Chapter 4 will reveal the consequences, the justice served, and the lesson everyone will remember. Evelyn Carter sat in her car for a brief moment, letting the calm of the morning settle around her, aware of the ripple her actions had already caused, and she knew this was not just about Officer Reynolds, but about reminding an entire community that authority comes with responsibility, humility, and respect. She drove slowly toward the local precinct, her mind composed yet strategic, knowing she had to confront Reynolds officially to ensure he grasped the severity of his bias and misconduct. The officers inside noticed her arrival immediately. Whispers filled the hallways as the name Evelyn Carter carried weight beyond any ordinary authority, and those who had witnessed the pharmacy incident realized justice was about to unfold. Officer Reynolds tried to compose himself as she entered, his stern facade failing under the intense gaze of a woman who had seen, understood, and corrected injustice countless times. Evelyn's calm yet commanding voice filled the office, addressing every officer present, explaining not just the events that had occurred, but the larger implications of racial assumptions, the misuse of authority, and the harm caused when respect is withheld from those who deserve it. She spoke of vigilance, fairness, and accountability, each word hitting harder than any reprimand, teaching that the measure of a professional is not power, but integrity and observation. Reynolds shifted uneasily, realizing that his arrogance, quick judgments, and habitual assumptions had not only humiliated an innocent citizen, but had also eroded the trust of the community he was meant to serve, and this lesson would follow him for the rest of his career. The staff and customers who had watched the incident unfold at the pharmacy were invited to share their accounts, highlighting how perception and bias influence action, and Evelyn used these testimonies to create a living example of justice and moral clarity. Each recounting was met with her affirmation, guidance, and quiet strength, ensuring that the narrative would not be forgotten and that the lesson of fairness would extend beyond a single encounter. Reynolds, facing the reality of his actions, was guided to reflect, apologize, and take concrete steps to rebuild trust, understanding that true authority comes from wisdom, humility, and the courage to admit mistakes. Evelyn left the precinct only after ensuring that systemic change would begin with awareness, that officers would be trained to recognize implicit biases, and that respect for every member of society would be non-negotiable. The community, staff, and bystanders felt the weight and impact of what had transpired, knowing that appearances can deceive, assumptions can harm, and that standing firm in integrity can transform the course of injustice into education and empowerment. The lesson was clear. Courage is not loud, justice is not reactive, and the quiet power of knowledge and experience can turn a moment of racial prejudice into a lasting example of fairness, accountability, and humanity. If you found this story moving, inspiring, and eye-opening, don't forget to comment your thoughts, share how it made you reflect, and subscribe to follow more stories where courage, justice, and truth overcome prejudice, because every lesson like Evelyn's deserves to reach the world.